I want you packed up and gone before the reading, tomorrow morning." Clifton Hollins didn't look at his wife when he said it. He stood in the bedroom doorway with his phone in one hand, and his suit jacket hooked over the other arm, and he said it the way you might tell someone their parking meter was about to run out. Matter of fact. Already thinking about something else. Verity Hollins sat on the edge of the bed they'd shared for 8 years and kept her hands very still in her lap. "The reading's at 10, Clifton continued, still scrolling. "Gareth's firm in Kingston. I'll have everything sorted by noon, and I'd rather not come home to find you still here." She finally looked up at him. The man she'd married when she was 28, the one who'd shown up at her graphic design studio with coffee and a wide smile, and asked if she wanted to see the country inn his family owned in Prince Edward County, was now watching something on his phone with the focused indifference of someone waiting for a notification. "Your mother built those inns," Verity said quietly. "You haven't visited one in 3 years." Clifton glanced up. Something shifted in his expression, not guilt, just irritation at being interrupted. "The lawyer's been clear. Everything goes to the estate, and I'm the sole heir. The prenup protects me completely. You leave with what you came in with." She remembered signing that prenup. She'd been so certain the marriage would last that she'd signed it in 20 minutes over coffee, barely reading it. Agnes had pulled her aside afterward and said, in her careful, unhurried way, "You should have had someone look at that, sweetheart." Verity had laughed. She'd been so in love. "Orla's coming over tonight," Clifton added, already turning away. "You can use the study, I don't want you in the hallway." He left. The latch caught behind him with a sound like a small conclusion. Verity sat in the silence and listened to the house settle around her. She was 36 years old. She had no income of her own. She'd shuttered her freelance practice 4 years ago, when Clifton asked her to manage the household and be available while his mother recovered. She had no savings that weren't in joint accounts. Clifton had already restructured. She had the clothes in that closet, her grandmother's quilt folded on the chair in the corner, and her laptop. And she had the memory of what Agnes Corrigan Hollins had told her, 11 days before she died. Agnes had built her first inn from a leaking 19th-century farmhouse in Prince Edward County. She and her husband Douglas had done most of the renovation themselves, Douglas doing the structural work, Agnes doing the plumbing, both of them doing everything else. After Douglas died of a heart attack when Clifton was 12, Agnes had kept going. Not because stopping was painful, but because it simply wasn't something she knew how to do. By the time Verity married into the family, Agnes owned 4 lodges across Ontario, employed 62 people full-time, and still personally handwrote thank you notes to guests who left kind reviews. 2.5 years ago, Agnes had fallen in her garden and struck her head against the stone edging of a flower bed. The bleed was small, but the consequences weren't. The hospital stay left her with a limp, tremors in her right hand, and fatigue that arrived without warning and leveled her for hours. Clifton had begun researching memory care facilities while Agnes was still in hospital. "She's not safe on her own," he'd said. "She needs round-the-clock professional attention." "She needs family," Verity had said. It was one of the very few times she'd pushed back directly, without softening her voice first. Something about the brisk administrative quality in Clifton's tone, as though his mother were an asset to be repositioned, had made it easy. Agnes moved into the ground-floor guest room of their home in Millhaven. Verity learned the physio exercises, learned which questions to ask the neurologist, learned that Agnes slept better with the window cracked even in February, and that she preferred silence to background television and strong tea to weak. She sat with her through the long, slow afternoons when the fatigue came and Agnes just needed someone nearby, who wasn't checking their phone every 4 minutes. Clifton came home late most nights. He stopped attending Agnes's appointments after the 2nd month. He would appear occasionally in the doorway of his mother's room, and ask if she needed anything in the tone of someone who hoped the answer was no. Agnes saw all of this. She had the kind of intelligence that didn't require speed. It simply waited. Her eyes were sharp in a way that had nothing to do with the weakness in her hands. Over 2.5 years she and Verity had filled the slow hours with the kind of conversation Verity hadn't had since her own mother died. Agnes talked about the early years of the business, about the supplier who'd tried to swindle her in 1991, and why she'd chosen not to ruin him publicly, about the winter she'd been 3 weeks from losing everything, and had decided to make one more phone call instead. She talked about Douglas, who had been steadier than she was and funnier, and whom she still missed every single morning. "The thing about building something," Agnes said one evening while Verity sat beside her reading, "is that the moment you start thinking about what you'll eventually take out of it, you've already begun to let it die. The extraction is the end, not the beginning. Verity looked up. Is that what Clifton's doing? Agnes was quiet for a moment. Clifton has always believed the properties are his to spend. Even when Douglas was alive I could see it. That posture he has, like everything around him, is simply waiting to be converted into something else. She paused. My accountant called me 6 weeks ago. Did you know that? Verity hadn't. 3 of the 4 inns have been transferred, Agnes said, to a numbered corporation. The signatures on the documents are mine. I did not sign them. The room changed quality. Nice. I've known for 6 weeks, she continued. Her voice was still level, as if she were reporting on a business matter, which she was. I didn't say anything until I'd done something about it. I have a lawyer. Not Gareth, someone else. Vincent called her out of Kingston. He's been moving quietly. Verity looked at her. What has he been doing? Agnes reached out and took her hand. Her grip was still firm. The kind of things that hold up in court. She paused. Are you going to be all right, whatever comes next? Are you someone who can stand back up? I think so, Verity said. I know so, Agnes replied. I've watched you stand back up quietly for 2 years. You're better at it than you think. Agnes died 11 days later. Peaceful, the doctor said. Verity had found her in the morning and had sat beside her for a long time before she called anyone, because she wasn't ready to let the rest of the world in yet. Clifton cried briefly at the funeral and spent most of the reception on his phone. Now, sitting in the study while Orla's voice drifted through the house below her, and someone opened a bottle of what sounded like something expensive, Verity thought about Vincent Calder. His card was still in her wallet. She'd never had any reason to throw it away. She stood up and began to pack. Not because Clifton had told her to, because the life she'd been living in this house was already finished, and she needed to be ready for whatever came next. After midnight the house went quiet. She sat on the daybed with her bags stacked by the door and her laptop open and didn't sleep. She thought about what Becca had said 6 months ago, when Verity had finally told her about the affair, told her in halting pieces over the phone one evening, because saying it out loud to someone who genuinely knew her was harder than she'd expected. Becca had said, simply, you need to leave Ver. You have nothing to prove by staying, and Verity had said, Agnes needs me, and Becca had been quiet in the way that meant she understood, even if she thought it was costing too much. She thought about the day she found out about Orla. She'd driven to Clifton's office to drop off a file he'd left at home, and the outer desk had been empty, and she'd pushed open his office door and caught the tail end of a conversation. Orla's voice, easy and certain, saying, once the estate processes, we can actually stop hiding this, before they both looked up and saw her. Verity had pulled the door shut. She'd stood in the hallway for a full minute, her hand still flat on the wood. Then she'd left the file at the reception desk and driven home. She'd told Agnes that night. She hadn't planned to, but Agnes had looked at her across the dinner table and asked quietly, what happened? And once Verity started she couldn't stop. Agnes had listened to all of it. When Verity finished she looked at her own hands resting on the table and said, he's been planning this for longer than you know. But I have been planning longer than he thinks. She hadn't said more than that. But as Verity was leaving the room, Agnes had said, don't let him see you grieve, he'll use it. The alarm went off at 7. Verity showered and put on the gray wool dress she'd packed at the top of the bag. Professional, understated, nothing he could read. She came out to find Clifton in the kitchen in his best suit, making coffee with the deliberate energy of a man looking forward to his day. He glanced at her bags by the door and nodded once, satisfied. Vincent Calder's office sent a notice, he said. He said the name the way you'd say something minor and slightly irritate. Apparently he has a secondary role, some formality. Gareth will handle everything of substance. Of course, Verity said. Clifton looked at her for a moment. Something almost like weariness crossed his face, but he shook it off. They drove to Kingston in Clifton's car, Orla in the passenger seat, Verity in the back, the October countryside moving past the windows in full copper and red, the way the maples along the highway did every year in eastern Ontario, briefly and reliably brilliant. Verity watched it and thought about Agnes driving this route in winter, alone after Douglas died, keeping the business going because it was the shape of her life, and she wasn't willing to let someone else's absence undo it. The law office was on the second floor of a heritage limestone building near the waterfront. 2 lawyers were waiting at the conference table, Gareth Sims, gray-suited and comfortable, and Vincent Calder, white-haired and very still, with the particular quietness of someone who knows exactly what's coming. He caught Verity's eye as she sat down. He gave her a small nod. Clifton took the chair at the head of the table as if he were chairing the meeting. Orla sat beside him, her hand on his arm. Gareth opened his folder. I'll be direct. There are 2 documents before us. The first is the estate will I've held for the family. The second, he glanced at Vincent, was filed with the court 14 days before Agnes passed, and it supersedes all previous versions. Clifton sat up straighter. What do you mean supersedes? It was prepared by Mr. Calder, Gareth said. Agnes executed it while of sound mind. There is video documentation of the signing, a written statement from her GP and full witness attestation. It's been reviewed, it's valid. She had a brain injury. Clifton's voice was still controlled, but the surface of it was going thin. She wasn't in a position to make decisions of this magnitude. Any competent court would. I have a 22-minute recording, Vincent said, of Agnes sitting in this office explaining her wishes clearly, calmly, and in considerable detail. She was asked twice whether she was under any pressure or undue influence. He paused. She laughed both times, she said. He glanced at his notes. Only the pressure of wanting to get this right. And I've had that my whole life. Clifton was quiet. Vincent read the document. Agnes Corrigan Hollins was leaving her estate, all 4 properties, the Kingston house, the investment accounts, and the remaining business assets, to Verity Hollins. To Clifton, she was leaving a letter and her sincere hope that he found some way to live that didn't require taking from other people. Orla's hand dropped from Clifton's arm. There is one additional matter, Vincent said, producing a second folder. In the 14 months prior to Agnes's death, 3 of her 4 properties were transferred to a numbered corporation, Ontarian Holdings 1184 Inc., via documents bearing Agnes's signature. Forensic analysis determined those signatures were forged. The relevant documentation has been submitted to the OP Economic Crimes Unit. A file is already open. The room was very quiet. That's, Clifton started. Agnes reported it herself, Vincent said, in this office, on video 2 months before she died. He looked at Clifton steadily. She was very clear about what had been done and who had done it. She built those properties over 30 years, she noticed. Clifton's chair scraped back. Verity had told herself she wouldn't speak. She'd planned to sit quietly and let the documents do what they were designed to do. But when Clifton stood up and pointed at her, she was the manipulation, he said. She was the one who'd engineered this, who had spent 2 years working on a sick woman, isolating her, turning her against her own son. Something in Verity's chest pulled taut and she found herself looking directly at him. She was not isolated, she said. Her voice was calm, calmer than she'd expected. She had you. You were 2 hours away and chose not to visit. That was your decision, Clifton, not mine. He stared at her. She taught me about the business because she wanted someone to talk to. She changed the will because she watched you for 2.5 years and made a decision. That's not manipulation. That's her paying attention. She paused. She was very good at paying attention. I think you forgot that. Clifton opened his mouth and closed it again. The security officer who had been waiting near the door stepped forward. Clifton was asked politely but without ambiguity to leave, he argued. Orla touched his sleeve and said quietly, Clifton, please. Eventually they left. The room settled into silence. Verity looked at the envelope on the table. Her name was on it in Agnes's handwriting, still upright and deliberate, even near the end. She opened it. Dear Verity, it began. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you more while there was still time. I always think I have more time. It's a bad habit I appear to be taking with me. She pressed her hand briefly over her mouth and kept reading. You came into this family hoping to build something with someone and found yourself building alone. I am sorry for my part in that. For not seeing sooner what Clifton was becoming. I watched you care for me with a steadiness you didn't even notice in yourself. You did it without calculating. I know because I watched carefully for 2 years to see if you would, and you never did. Some people have that quality and some people don't. You can't manufacture it. The properties are in poor shape. Clifton's neglect has done real damage and it will take time to fix, but the staff are good. Especially Ruth at the Frontenac, and the team in Muskoka who stayed on despite everything. Talk to them before you make decisions. They'll tell you what's real. I'm leaving you the business because I believe you'll do something decent with it. Not to reward your kindness to me, though I am grateful beyond what I can say in a letter. But because in 2.5 years of conversation, I watched you understand things. You asked the right questions. You listened even when the answers were uncomfortable. You have better instincts for this than you know. You are going to be frightened. That's all right. I was frightened for the first 4 years at Crestview, and I built it anyway. The fear doesn't go away entirely. You just get used to working alongside it. One more thing. Please live a full life. You are 36 years old. Don't spend it in service to the thing I left you. Let it work for you. Have dinners with people you actually like. Call your friend Becca more than you think you need to. Find something outside of work that makes you feel like yourself. That is the best way to honor what I tried to build, not by grinding yourself down but by being well. With love and very great respect, Agnes. She read it twice more. There in the limestone office with the October light coming in at a low angle, and Vincent Calder sitting quietly across from her, with the unhurried patience of someone who understood what letters like this cost. Then she folded it, put it back in the envelope and looked up. Tell me what I need to know first, she said. Clifton was arrested 6 weeks later on a fraud charge that the Crown described, in the press release, as substantial. He spent 4 months on bail before pleading guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. The Hollands family solicitor stopped returning calls. The numbered corporation was unwound. The 3 transferred properties reverted to the estate. The divorce was filed and finalized. Clifton contested nothing. He had nothing to contest it with. Verity moved into Agnes's house in Kingston and began learning what she'd inherited. The Frontenac Inn's general manager, Ruth Okoro, walked her through the books over 3 long sessions in the property's small back office and spoke to her as a colleague, not a charity case, which Verity found she needed more than she'd have predicted. The bones are good, Ruth said. He deferred everything and cut every budget he could. But your mother-in-law built these properties to last. The clients who stayed remember what they used to be. Then that's where we start, Verity said. She hired a hospitality consultant to help stabilize the Muskoka property. She called the long-term clients who had been let down and told them the truth. There had been serious mismanagement, it was being corrected, and if they gave her 1 season she would prove it was worth the patience. Several of them did. Word moved through the industry the way it always does in small professional circles, slowly and then all at once. Becca drove up from Toronto in November and sat in Agnes's kitchen with 2 bottles of wine, and the kind of presence that doesn't require much talking. You seem different, Becca said eventually. I am different, Verity said. Good. Different. Verity turned her glass in her hands. I spent 8 years making myself smaller to fit into something that was wrong for me. It's strange to just stop. She paused. Agnes left me a letter telling me not to grind myself down over this, to live well. I think about that a lot. Becca looked at her across the table. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She was someone everyone should have had, Verity said. The ones who deserved her usually didn't know what they had. By the following summer the 4 inns were running at the best occupancy rates Agnes had seen in 5 years, according to the records Ruth had kept. Verity stood at the front desk of the Frontenac Inn on a Friday afternoon in July and watched guests arrive. Families, couples, a group of older women who were clearly celebrating something, and thought about Agnes handwriting thank you notes at a desk very much like this one, year after year, because the work of caring for a thing is never really finished, and she'd understood that and kept showing up anyway. She thought about a woman she'd been 8 years ago, 28 and hopeful, and not yet paying attention to the right things. She didn't regret her. She understood her. That version of herself had done what she could with what she had, and when it had finally become impossible to keep going the old way, she had packed her bags. Not because she was surrendering, but because she was ready. Agnes had seen it coming before Verity had. She had built a door and made sure Verity would be standing in front of it when the time came. That was the gift, not the money, not the inns, not the limestone house in Kingston where the windows looked out over the water. The gift was being seen clearly by someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. On hard days, Verity took Agnes's letter out of the top drawer of the desk at Crestview. The original property, the one built from a leaking farmhouse with 2 people's hands and 1 person's stubbornness, and read the line she came back to most. The fear doesn't go away entirely, you just get used to working alongside it. She was still a little afraid most mornings. She thought she probably would be for a while. But she was also for the first time in longer than she could precisely name, doing something that was entirely and unmistakably hers.